Welcome, friends, to another Wolff Responds. I want to call this one the BRICS, another step forward. The BRICS have just had, I believe it's their 17th annual meeting in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, hosted by the leader there, Mr. Lula. And I want to talk about the significance of this institution, the BRICS. Next year, it will be hosted by Mr. Modi, the leader of India, and I believe it will take place in India. They welcomed a new member, Indonesia. I want to remind people Indonesia has a population of 280 million people, only a little bit smaller than the United States. The BRICS, again, for those who may still not know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They also have a dozen partner nations that are part of the BRICS and are slowly and steadily being integrated into them. Before I talk about the significance of their meetings and what they've decided to do sooner, some later, I want to also mention a milestone that they achieved just a few weeks ago when it was announced that they just crossed $1 trillion. That is the value of the trade among members of the BRICS. $1 trillion worth of trade. Why is that important? Well, it's important because that's what the BRICS is about. Doing international trade on their own, out from under the domination of the United States. And that's indeed why the BRICS are important. They are not anti-American, as Mr. Trump casually likes to say. That's really not relevant to them. What they are interested in doing is becoming a part of a world economy that isn't anymore dominated by the US dollar as the global currency, by the US military as a kind of policeman for what trade can or cannot happen, as the source of goods they have to buy, markets they have to sell into, money they have to borrow, investments they have to secure. The United States came out of World War II dominant. All the other potential competitors had been destroyed economically and often also militarily and politically by World War II. And by that I mean Japan, China, Russia, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Canada, you name it. They could not compete for one reason or another. The United States, king of the hill. Now, of course, any reasonable person with even a minimal grasp of history would have known that these were very special, very odd circumstances, and that the dominance of the United States, the dollar as the global currency, the United States as the producer of all producers, whether it was manufacturing or services or financial instruments, didn't matter. The U.S. dominated. It had the atom bomb. It had the overwhelming military, etc. Anyone with a good sense of history would have known this can't last. The advanced economies like Germany and Japan would come back. Yes, they would take a while, but they had the brain power, they had the institutions. And then there were the countries in Western Europe that had also achieved quite high levels of development. And there were the dark horses, if you like, Russia, China. No one quite knew whether they would come back from their destruction, and if so, how quickly. No one imagined what the Russians could do, and no one even had the faintest idea of what the Chinese proved they could do after World War II. Well, Americans were a little naive. They indulged themselves in believing it would last forever. Well, it didn't. And we now know that, but the BRICS is the most organized global manifestation. And that's why it's important to take note of the annual meeting they just had in Rio and the fact that they are bigger than they have ever been before, that they're doing more trade with one another than they ever did before, that they're borrowing money and making investments in one another more than they ever did before. And all of that is happening outside of and out from under the control, the domination of the United States. This is not to be confused with a lot of verbiage about de-dollarization. That's talk that's mostly symbolic. At this point, there isn't a substitute for the US dollar that could be the alternative they go to. They are looking to settle their payments with one another in each other's currencies and working out a way to keep track of all of that. And the technology, blockchain, and others now exists to make that relatively straightforward. And they are going in that direction, not to produce another currency other than the dollar. We're not at that point. That may develop, but we're not there. And that's not a priority of the BRICS. Even when they talk about it, it's clear they know that that's far in the future. They have to build the foundation. And what that means is economic development. And economic development based on their needs as the priority, not how they fit into a global economy dominated by the United States. That used to be what development meant. If you were a poor country in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and you went to Washington or you went to New York and you needed investment capital or you needed to open a market or you needed to secure supplies, you always got treated by saying, how can this thing you want be consistent with what we here want in New York and Washington? And a compromise was the outcome. You got something for your canal in Nigeria. You got something for your medical system in Paraguay, but you also had to do all of that within the framework of loan agreements that the United States imposed on you, trade agreements, or you had to be sure not to do something that the United States didn't want, because if you did, then they wouldn't be so forthcoming on whatever it is you needed. What the BRICS is about is creating within the world economy a new and different part of it. And that part is the part not subject to the United States' direct or indirect economic, political, and military power. Do they escape from that 100%? No. The United States remains a global force. I mean, there are three major wars in the world today: Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran, and the United States is a central player in every one of them. And before that, we had Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam, and I could go on. So the world is not free of the United States and will not be for quite some time. But the relative position of the United States is shrinking. and it has been for 50 years. Only it's going faster now because the institutions are being formed and developed and nurtured as we speak. It is no longer appropriate to talk about the United States being challenged by the economic powerhouse that China has become. That's still true, but it isn't the main story. The BRICS are the main story. China is the key part of that, no question. But the BRICS are much bigger than just China. And they are the new phenomena of the world economy and need to be understood in that way. They are quite different one from the other. They have clashes in their cultures, their religions, their political ambitions, their military capabilities. They have arguments. They will have more of them. They don't all look at the Israeli activity in Gaza in quite the same way, and so on. But whatever those differences, they are carving out a space in the world economy that is a new option for everyone. And I mean everyone, every company working internationally, every business, and every country is rethinking strategy. How do we grow this business? How do we diversify the people we borrow from, the people we sell to, the alliances we as a country make? All of those fundamental decisions about world affairs are being remade as I speak to you. Every country, every business is realizing that the world economy in which they are groping their way to a future is in the process of a fundamental change, and the BRICS is the absolute core of that. The BRICS together now account for about 35% of the world's total output of goods and services. 35% of the aggregate GDP of this planet. The G7, that's the United States and its 6 major allies, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, only account for 27, 28%. So the BRICS are already a bigger, richer, wealthier part of the world economy. That's why every company has to rethink its strategy. You can't focus on the G7, which for many of them was what they did kind of automatically for the last 75 years. That's not happening anymore. If you send a trade delegation to Washington and New York, which many of them do still, as soon as they're finished in Washington and New York, they go to New Delhi or Beijing or Sao Paulo in Brazil, and they present the same project. And they say, who can help us more? And the BRICS have gone out of their way, as I'm sure they will in the future, to carve their place in the world economy. And they know that the way to do that is to offer a better deal than you can get in the West. They're not stupid. They know the game. It's just like if a new brand of soda pop is available in your neighborhood, it might offer a cheaper can or a cheaper bottle than the traditional soda pop in order to get you to try it, in order to get you to see that it's good, etc., etc. That's what's going on. Conventional marketing, if you like. But it's now clear that the world is never going to be what it was in the last 75 years. Peculiarly, oddly, anomalously in the history of the world economy dominated by one country. Even the British, in the era of the British Empire, before the American Empire, didn't have the kind of control, never had the 800 military bases that the United States maintained, etc. So in a way, the United States peaked, its empire peaked, and it is now being challenged by somebody who has already surpassed the United States in number of ways. Militarily, you can see it in Ukraine. Economically, you can see it in China. Technologically, you can see that in China too. And I could go on. But that's my point. Pay attention to the BRICS. Don't dismiss them the way Mr. Trump does. That looks like ignorant behavior of someone who wants to bully his way through by pretending none of this is all that important and threatening the BRICS, which Mr. Trump also did. He indeed threatened countries that, quote, align themselves with the BRICS, whatever exactly that means, might be subject to tariffs or who knows what else. Let me conclude by bringing this all home a little closer. I believe for the first time, the meeting of the BRICS in Rio de Janeiro had as one of its participants, I don't think they had the right to vote as full members did, but they were there and welcomed to participate in all the discussions, was the country called Mexico. The chickens are coming home to roost, and we all better pay attention because it's going to affect everything. If interventions like this strike you as useful, please share them. That's why we make these videos with your roommate, with your workmate, with your family, your friends. It's a way of spreading the understanding that these are all devoted to develop. And of course, if you could help us defray some of the financial costs of making and distributing these videos, that would be enormously appreciated as well. Thank you.